Aloha and welcome to this episode of Maunalua Past, Present, and Future. I'm Chelsea Chang, a volunteer and youth advisor with Livable Hawaii Kai Hui, and your host for today's episode, which is all about Keawāwa Wetland. Today we have our guests here,
Hello.
Marty LaPrade and Geary Mizuno. Both are volunteers who work on the wetland and are part of the Hui's core team, correct? Mm-hmm. And who are working to bring awareness to Keawāwa Wetland and the importance of wetlands overall.
Yes.
Okay, so Marty, I understand that you've been volunteering is connected with Keawāwa for over a decade.
Yes.
So why don't you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I first noticed ʻleloNet at the Oahu Club when I took my son there for lessons. Mm-hmm. He's going to turn 22, and he was a little guy, like 6 years old. And I wondered what the birds were. They looked familiar, and I remembered then the children's book, Maui and the Secret of Fire. So I began to teach myself a little more about them scientifically and wanted to develop lessons for my students. And then I went to a neighborhood board meeting and met up with the folks from the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui and found out what they were doing and joined up with them.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Marty. And Geary, you are the newest member with the Hui, and I understand that you're no longer living in Hawaii, but yet here you are volunteering with Keawāwa Wetland.
Yes, in fact, I haven't lived in Hawaii as a resident basically since I graduated from McKinley High School in 1973, went off to college and then to law school. And basically since 1980, I've been living in, well, not actually 1977, I've been living in the Washington, D.C. metro area.
Oh, wow.
But I have my background here, and I was very active in environmental restoration and outdoor activities when I was in high school and college. When my mother needed some help, and I came back in May of 2018, and I'm staying here for a year, I thought, well, this is a perfect time to help, now that I'm an older person, have a little bit more experience, a little bit more insight, help volunteer groups in environmental restoration. And what better place than Hawea, which is right in the same valley as where my mother and I live, which is Hahione Valley.
Wow, wonderful. Such a wonderful story. Yeah. So Marty, for those who have not even heard of Keawāwa Wetland,
right.
Why don't we talk about all the work of restoration that's been done from late 2012 until present?
Well, we've had to remove over 460 invasive plants, a lot of kiawe shrubs and trees, and there was illegal dumping, all kinds of opala throughout the 5 acres. We found very unusual things. We began to observe the ʻleloNet and try to understand the ecosystem and figure out what could be done to save this wetland area and the upland area. Then we were aware of some cultural sites, so we had to hand clear much of the area and really being careful. There was a cultural preservation plan for Hawea, which sits right next to the wetland. And there was an ancient niu grove, well, descendants of the ancient grove.
Right.
Those trees are there now. And we had to figure out how to source native plants, which native plants should be there, remove invasives, and just bring community awareness to the area.
Right.
Because it was largely forgotten, and yet hundreds of, not more, people drove by every day.
Oh my. Geary, anything you want to add from more focused on a conservation approach?
Well, the NRCS, or the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is really our partner in helping us develop a conservation plan for Keawāwa focused on the ʻleloNet, which are endangered. And they've helped us to construct a fence to keep out larger predators. And they've also helped us partner with Gray Bar Wildlife Services, which are trapping for mongoose and rats, which of course threatened ʻleloNet, the chicks and their eggs. So we have to remember that Keawāwa complex with Hawea you know, there are many different kinds of artifacts and resources all clustered in this one area. And so the NRCS was very helpful in trying to sort that out.
Oh, I see. So are there any other partnerships with the Keawāwa Wetland?
Yes, well, our primary consultant and technical advisor on the protection of the ŌleloNet is Dr. Charles Van Rees. He's with Tufts University in Boston, and I think he has a really great deal because he gets to come to Hawaii, especially during the winter.
That is a great deal.
But he's very knowledgeable on the ŌleloNet. He has done studies on the genetics of ŌleloNet and has been able to show that we have different populations, you know, at different wetlands. And so he's certainly a great partner. We also have, and we're just starting up this partnership with the Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources, their aquatic division, and Tagawa in particular, because Keawāwa and we have a spring constitute Anki-A-line habitat, which is habitat where it's partially salty water, but it's connected to the ocean, but not through a open channel. The connection is actually underwater. And I just brought a book that she wrote, Hawaii's Anki-A-line Pools, which is a very good summary of the Anki-A-line pool habitat and the things that can be found in it. Certainly at Keawāwa, we have found that we have ʻopaiʻula. And we're doing genetic testing right now to determine whether that is a separate lineage from ʻopaiʻula at other pools on Oahu.
Our newest endangered animal for our site.
And then we're also we're hoping to develop other partnerships with the Department of Land and Natural Resources, the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and also the University of Hawaii, because you know, part of the our partnership is trying to educate people, and we have students in various things, geophysics, landscape, architecture, perhaps even the botany and agriculture department that could provide us with technical resources and also have a learning experience for the students there.
Absolutely. Speaking of students, why don't we talk a little bit more about community and school engagements and volunteer opportunities. So I understand that on every second Saturday, there is a work day at Keawāwa Wetland. So what can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh, the work days. Well, every second Saturday, people come out and volunteer. Everyone's welcome. And we give them a little orientation. And if our cultural advisors are there, they might take a little cultural tour or a wetland tour and learn more about it. Geary?
Yes, and I think the important thing is that the educational component includes the concept that we are on Hawaiian sacred land because of Hawaii, and so there is a pule. Typically, you ask permission to go onto the land and to steward it. And I think when we have the students and the general public come and help us on these second Saturdays, they do things such as you know, alien plant removal, as you can see over here, and you know, we're also planting native plants. And it's a struggle sometimes because oftentimes the students don't know how, or the public don't know that they should be digging out the roots of the weeds, so that they don't resprout. But it's all for the purpose of ensuring that we have good habitat for the ʻleloNet, certainly. But also, I think our long-term goal is that the wetland will be replanted and the areas around it will be replanted as an educational resource so that the public can see what native Hawaiian plants existed before the significant human alterations in the Maunalua area.
And Marty, I understand that you are a second grade teacher at Marinol. So what can you tell me more about like reaching out to the next generation in regards to Keawāwa Wetland?
Well, we also have days when we bring out, say, might be Boy Scouts or students from schools. And my own school's come out several times, so that's been fun.
That's cute.
And it's nice to give the students a real-world, hands-on experience in nature so they can not only give back, but just have that experience being out on the wetland. And you know, they're kind of skeptical sometimes, like, do I really want to go for a morning of pulling weeds in the heat? But by the time the morning wraps up, they often tell me, we don't want to leave. And they do wonderful work. And they really enjoy it, and they learn so much just being out there, especially since so many of them are from urban areas.
Oh.
So it's wonderful to see.
Absolutely.
And we have Boy Scouts, and do you know we have some partners that have helped us with community outreach?
Oh, is that right?
We had just completed a Disney conservation grant.
Oh.
And so it helps us to get more and more schools to know about the field trips they can do at the wetland. So with Disney Conservation Grant we wrapped it up with World Wetland Day of 2018. We have, that brought us closer together working with the Conservation Council of Hawaii. Our neighbor, the Oahu Club, is a wonderful partner. And our newest partner is Kamehameha Schools. And we're about to get started to build a traditional holly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned World Wetland Day, which was this past month, February, and that was a busy month.
Yeah.
So tell me more about World Wetland Day.
Well, this past World Wetland Day, February 2nd, 2019, we had the hula, Catherine Ostrom's Halau Hula, and they came out and did some wonderful hula for us. And then we had speakers, Heidi Bornhorst and Annette Tagawa. Her book. She shared about the Opai'ula. We had Kaleo Pike share some cultural knowledge and bring the drum kaniala'a, which came from one of our trees. And we really paid tribute to our late friend Marjorie Ziegler from Conservation Council for Hawaii and honored her with plantings, and the Kaiser High School students, the Wipeout crew, with their teacher Pavelaz, they came and they planted many natives.
So we have some of these plants, native plants here, so I thought maybe I would just kind of go through them here.
Absolutely, please.
So I think the plant that is, I would call it the iconic Hawaiian plant, is this plant here. It's a little seedling, but this is the ohia lehua.
Ohia lehua.
Now, we actually have several species of ohia in Hawaii, but the one that's most widespread is the ohia lehua. And it does look very different depending upon where you grow, because there are many different varieties.
Right.
Okay, and then we have the native okupukupu fern here. Now, you can see that this is a relatively small plant, and this is actually full size. They don't get very much bigger. There is actually an alien or an introduced okupukupu, which is starting to spread. And,
no.
Yes. And then this plant here is ohai, and it's really starting to go to sleep, I think, because its leaves are kind of closed up. But in the sun, it's very silvery, and it reflects the light, and you can see it. If you ever get a chance to go to Kaena Point Natural Area Reserve, and there's a lot of ohai growing there. And then I think the last plant I wanted to actually point out is this plant here, the ule, or u'ule, as I've seen it spelled both ways. And this plant is actually in the rose family.
Oh.
And it has interesting white seeds, which are very hard. And actually, its scientific name its species name is named after those seeds, which are sort of like bone.
Right.
And I think the Hawaiians used to use the stalks of u'ule as little arrow shafts to shoot rats.
Oh, how useful.
And I thought I would just show you a book by Mark Merlin, Hawaiian Coastal Plants, that talks about some of these plants and other plants, not just the native ones, but the alien or the introduced plants that are that you can find at coastal areas. But this would be a good resource for the public.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And so if anybody from the public or students come out to these Second Saturdays or World Wetland Day, they would be working and learning about with these plants, correct?
Yes. I mean, they would. Probably there will be two things that we're doing. One is weeding and trying to get as many of the alien or introduced plants out, and then having the native plants planted in the place of the native plants. And, I mean, it certainly is going to help the wetlands and Havea, but really what I'm looking at is that's just a process. I mean, that could happen with a contractor. The real purpose of getting people there is to teach them about the specialness of Hawaii and of Havea and Keawāwa, and to foster a sense of stewardship.
Absolutely.
So that they have a personal connection with Hawaii in a way that, say, a tourist or someone who's living here but has no connection with the culture or the geology or the natural history.
I see. Okay. So moving on, with Marty, so since you've been working with the Keawāwa Wetland for a long period of time, what can you tell me about the changes that have gone through over the years?
Well, it used to be completely overgrown and you could barely walk through there. And we had to find out where was the edge of the wetland and what was under all that brush, right? And the land began to reveal itself as volunteers did their part. And it changes with seasons. Unusual things happen. There are always surprises. And we just learn so much. It's a wonderful living laboratory. And I think I would like to see people that come there and are learning, that they walk away with a deeper understanding of interconnectedness of not only the ahupua'a and where wetland might fit into that system or does fit into that system, but how the health of our natural areas it's really important for our own survival, and how the health of a wetland is important to keeping a watershed intact and everything that's connected to that. And I just love that it's place-based. As you said, people are getting to know Hawaii and the plants, the animals, the culture, and just to preserve that and respect it.
I see. Okay. So what more would you like to share about the audience about the work that you are doing this year?
Well, I'm going to be going back at the end of April, so I'm really focused on the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui's preparations for public access days, which are going to occur in June. But in order to have the public have a safe and a good experience on the Kaiwi Coast Mauka lands, which were preserved because of many people donating money and the efforts of another set of partner organizations.
Right.
We need to have 2 volunteer days that are going to be happening in April. And so we hope to have trail clearing. I mean, hopefully we'll have some volunteers coming out to help us do trail clearing on 2 days, clearing around some of the native plants that are still struggling on the Kaiwi Coast Mauka lands. We're going to be having an expert from the Oahu Invasive Species Council show people how to look for the introduced Maiaparum thrip, which is threatening our Nile plants, our native Nile plants. And we hope to have a Bishop Museum person, a botanist, come and collect alien plants that are growing on our property, so that we have a baseline of what is there on the property, so that as we go through changes on the property, removing plants, and we can say that, okay, this is what has changed. And again, we hope that the volunteers will be coming out to help and help us collect those plants and carry down those bags.
Right. Leave the heavy work to the young.
Yeah.
What about for you, Marty?
I would like to see people come out and be engaged. Often by volunteering, you find out what are your talents and gifts, and you get so much by giving back. And I'd like you to come out and be part of the fun. We'd love to meet you.
Right, absolutely. So, any additional comments or something that you really want to touch upon a little bit more or like emphasize with our audience?
Well, I'd like to talk about the Ōlelo. if I
Absolutely,
could.
right.
In fact, they're the most secretive bird, wetland bird in Hawaii. And very hard to see in other wetlands. You could catch a glimpse of them. But because they're a little bit used to people, especially on the Oahu Club side, you can catch a good view of them, and they're young. And it's a fascinating sight, the way they take care of each other, like a ohana, whereas the juvenile birds will feed and watch and protect the young while the parents go off to get their food, and they take turns. And and it's entertaining. They're quite entertaining. It seems like they have personalities, but you know. We have other wildlife there, the pinau, the giant dragonfly.
Oh.
We have introduced wildlife, which are interesting too. We have ducks, crayfish.
Yes, we do have crayfish.
There's even tilapia in the pond.
Oh, really?
But, you know, a lot of animals are dumped, like people dump their pets in the, and not now, I think
Right.
we've stopped that, but
Right.
in the past, and it creates problems for the birds, such as the turtles. Or,
Right.
So it's just a great chance, especially for kids, to get out in nature. So it's a good family project.
Right, right. Okay. So speaking of like all of the native things that are there, Geary, I know that you are really big into plants. So are there any, like, can you tell us a little bit more about the non-native plants that are posing a harm to Keawāwa Wetland?
Well, we certainly have a number of introduced grasses that are growing in the area, and I think there's some fountain grass there, and I'm not even sure whether there's a common name for it, but there's a grass that has little burrs, which everyone, when they walk through it and the burrs get stuck to your pants, oh boy, they know it. And then we also have, and I think we saw that in one of the pictures showing on the Oahu Club side, introduced a shrub, Plukia, which is not good. It does suck up water, and also having those big shrubs close to the wetland, they provide cover for predators. So our long-term goal is to actually remove all the Plukia and koahaole, and that's yet another invasive that we have to deal with.
You might also see a black-crowned night heron or a ku'u, and the areas on record as having the little Hawaiian bat.
Oh.
Yeah, but I have not seen a bat myself. But I think that other things will reveal themselves. Most recently at a work day, we had a large Samoan crab, which I'd never seen there before. I think it's just a fluke that it found its way in. But that was interesting.
I think from, again, the historical aspect of Keawāwa is that it is actually part of a greater hydrogeological complex, which includes what I call Kuapa Pond, but it's the Hawaii Kai Marina. But it has actually, even before Kuapa Pond, it had a much longer Hawaiian name. And I still remember in the early '60s when my dad took me out there that the original Hawaiian gates at the mouth of the ocean were still in place at that time.
Wow.
And yeah, so when you look at it now, and it's really quite different. There used to actually be a connection, a little stream, if you want to call it, or certainly a water course that went from Keawāwa through the condominium buildings that are there and connecting to the marina. And it's actually shown on the maps. There is a well, a deep well, and which is really a spring, I think.
Yep, I think at ground level it changes from stones with concrete to stones without concrete. So I've talked to elders, and they say that it's one of the few pre-contact wells because there was a village nearby.
Oh.
So there's a lot of history to learn.
Right.
And it's fun we have people that go to the archives or look up historical photos, and we're piecing all that together.
I read a historical account that said that when the whaling ships would stop in Maunalua Bay, in Haheone, they would actually walk up to and refill their water things at a spring.
Oh.
Now, they didn't mention the name of the spring, but that's got to be, I mean, this well and this is probably where they got their water from.
Keawāwa, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then the community and the students and anyone who's even interested can come to these work days to learn more about the history.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
I mean, every time that I've come to been to a work day, I've always been able to see ŌleloNet. So if you want to see an ŌleloNet, come to a work day. And as I said, we always try to start off the work day if we have a cultural advisor there with ipule, and there's educational time before we work. And then, of course, when we are talking about what you need to weed and what you're going to be planting, we're trying to explain the difference between these kinds of plants and why that's important.
You learn to recognize a native from invasive.
Right.
And so, like I said, it's a combination of volunteering to work, but also an educational experience.
And I'd like to say, this little bird's name is Lele.
Hi,
And he
Lele.
was named after one of the birds that when Dr. Charles Van Rees was tracking and found on the other side of the island. But the ŌleloNet are different from the moorhen you might see in a swamp in Florida. They're
Right.
genetically different, so separate subspecies.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice note to wrap up this episode of Maunalua Past, Present, and Future. A big mahalo to our viewers and Marty LaPrade, Geary Mizuno, the folks
you.
at the Ōlelo Studio in Kaimuki, and Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. My name is Chelsea Chang, and I was your host. Aloha hui ho, and see you next time.